It's really fun to be back on myjewishlearning.com. I was here in the spring. I think you were the first Zoom class I ever did, and it was so much fun. And we've all learned a lot since then. Everyone's become an expert on Zooming. And this was really fun to think about the menorah, especially at this time of year, the darkest time of year, but we're all lighting the candles of the Hanukkah right now. And it really forced me to think about all the ways I've used menorah and light and other things we're going to talk about in my own art. And I'm so happy to share it with you. Let me just give a caveat. Even though I've been a Judaic artist for 36 years, I'm not an art historian. So I'm learning a lot about the history of art as I prepared for this, but I am not the authority. I did put several links in the chat, some interesting videos to go to after if you have some interest in any particular subject that I cover. But this is really everything I wanted to know about the menorah, and that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. So with that, let me just share my screen, and I'm going to start a little discussion about the menorah. So let me go to this and start here. Okay. Julie, how's that working? Is that good?
That's perfect, Jeanette.
Okay, great. In 1948, when Israel was a new state and the state was trying to decide how they were going to share their emblem with the world, the Emblem and Flag Committee was appointed by the Provisional State Council to choose a symbol that would best represent Israel. An announcement was published in the newspaper, and the public was invited to make proposals. Graphic artists, amateurs, children, and many, many people sent in entries. They sent in pictures of doves, of lions, of stars of David, olive branches, the sabra fruit, and the menorah, and combinations of all of the above. For 9 months, the committee met. They had many arguments. They had to go back to the drawing board several times, and they tried to decide what was the most authentically Jewish symbol. I hope by the end of our discussion tonight, you will agree that the menorah is a wonderful symbol, not only of Israel, but of all of our hopes and ideas for redemption and for a light-filled world. So let's talk about the menorah. In Exodus, the menorah is referred to several times. The first time, it's discussed as a single lamp stand. And we think that it looked something, I'll show you in 1 second, but let me just read the quotation. "You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base and its shaft, its cups, calyxes, and petals shall be of one piece." That's in Exodus 25. And that probably refers to the lampstand that will be in the tabernacle, the tent of meeting that traveled with the Israelites from the time of the Exodus until Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. Between 957 BCE and 586 BCE, it was probably a single lampstand, and in the tabernacle, it was probably located here, in front of the Ark of the Covenant, which housed the 2 tablets, and there would be a lampstand. Now, from that first description that we saw in Exodus, we think it was probably a single lampstand, something like this. This bronze lampstand is an example of the kind of lamps that were found in the Near East at the time. So that description, you can see the calyxes, the floral decorations on the single lampstand. So probably at the time of the first temple, when you see any description of a menorah, you are probably reading about a single lampstand. Of course, we don't know for sure. There weren't photographs then, but that is the impression of most academics. Later on, a very little later in Exodus, God and Moses tell Bezalel. Bezalel, by the way, was the architect and the designer of all the accoutrements in the tabernacle. They told Bezalel to make the menorah of pure gold. There would be 6 branches stemming from its sides, 3 almond-shaped calyxes, all a single piece of beaten work of pure gold. This would be the menorah that would be in the second temple. That would be from 516 BCE to 70 AD. This is obviously not a photograph, but it is a 3D model of what the second temple probably looked like. And the menorah that we're going to be discussing and imagining would have been in the inner antechamber close to where the Ark of the Covenant was. And by the description in Exodus, we think that the menorah would have looked like this. It has 6 branches coming out from the single lampstand, and it has floral decorations on it that remind us of nature, and we'll get to what nature in a minute. The second description we have of the menorah came later, and we have examples of drawings of it from the Dura Europa synagogue in Syria. We'll get to more on that later too. But again, you see the influence of nature in the design of the menorah. And then during Mishnaic and Talmudic times, rabbis would describe what they think the menorah looked like at the time of the temple. So all these descriptions differ a little bit, but we know that they had 7 branches and a single center lampstand, but altogether 7 branches. This is an example of a recent find of a graffito on a plaster found in a house in the Jewish quarter of the Old City from around the 1st century BCE. And you can see by the drawing that it does match the description that Maimonides and other rabbis would later use to describe what the menorah must have looked like during the temple times. We've also, in the last few years, found evidence that the menorah was being used and that people had seen it in their own areas. So this is an example of only 2 years ago, an engraving of a menorah that was found on a Jewish tombstone near Jerusalem on a wall. You can just barely make it out. Here's another example of hikers who were walking through a dried up cistern near Jerusalem, and only 3 years ago discovered this carving of a menorah on the wall of the cistern, probably made as the people had just finished digging the cistern and preparing it before the water was let in. So you can see that evidence of menorahs are being found all the time around the Near East, and specifically in Israel. So what did the menorah look like, and why did it have 7 branches? This is a study that was done of the menorah by a graphic artist named Meir Ben Uri in 1956. And he did a mathematical evaluation of how it must have been made, how much gold was used, and all the different parts of the menorah. And this is one of his drawings. And from it, we can see that this lampstand had 6 branches off the main inner lampstand. So why, we ask, are there 7 branches on the menorah? One of the most spiritual reasons that speaks to me, and there are many reasons why the number 7 is important, but let's begin at the beginning. The first 7 words of the Torah are Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Those are 7 words. The center word is et. beginning with an aleph and ending with a taf, just like the Hebrew alphabet, from aleph to taf. The implication is that everything here, everything you see in the menorah, is all you need to know about creation and about God. The number 7 is significant, is the most significant number throughout the Torah. There are 7 days of creation. Tradition says that Moses' birthday and his death day is the 7th day of Adar. There are 7 colors in the rainbow. The ancient people knew of 7 planets, and we know that the number 7 appears throughout the Torah over and over again. We also know that this menorah that Bezalel designed was probably inspired by the nature around him in and around Israel. This is a plant called the Salvia palestinae. And the academics who worked at a place called Kadumim near Jerusalem believe that it inspired the shape of the menorah, which is very easy to see when you see these 2 photographs here. It grows like a menorah, and the petals on the plant were like this. This is a Salvia palestinae. By the way, Salvia is a kind of sage. In Hebrew, it's called Moriah. So it's a sage smell. And other references in Exodus say that the calyxes and the shape of the cups on the menorah were more like an almond tree. So either one looks beautiful and looks like what we see in the menorah as described by the rabbis and even by Bezalel. The priest in the temple would take oil containers and every day would light the menorah. This is a medieval manuscript showing you how the menorah was lit. Every day there would be light from the menorah. They're actually in the temple, the second temple, there were 10 menorahs described to be giving light to the whole temple. Although most scholars believe only one of them had these 7 branches, the others were single lampstands. So let me, let's see if I can, here. Zechariah was a prophet, and he had a vision in the year 520 BCE that the menorah was not just 7 branches, but that it had 49 lamps on it. Interestingly, Zechariah envisioned bowls at the top of the menorah. And he called, the word for bowl in Hebrew was gula, which is very close to another word in Hebrew, which is geula. Geula means redemption. So since Zechariah had his vision about the menorah, and he would have seen menorahs, he in his lifetime, he would have been at the temple, he returned from exile, that association of the menorah with redemption became even more strong. Now I want you, when you're looking at this slide, to look at the base of the menorah, because this base that Zechariah described is the base that the rabbis would later say is the actual menorah that was in the temple. And we're going to see a discrepancy in a few minutes between this base and a much more famous base that you all have seen a picture of. Zechariah's vision of the menorah became very popular throughout the world. And even to this day, the idea that the menorah has a mystical effect is conveyed throughout art. This is a Turkish example in the Israel Museum of a shviti. A shviti is a special piece of art that has the name of God at the top, you can see that, has a menorah on it. And in this example, you see the bowls at the top where Zechariah described these bowls at the top of the menorah. And then the words on the Shaviti are all different names of God. So this is an example not only of an amulet from Turkey, but of a way that people have used the menorah in art. This is a paper cutting, multi-layered, many different colors of paper layered by this Turkish artist in the 19th century. Okay, so now let's get to why we're talking about the menorah at this time of year. So there's a lot of confusion around Hanukkah about the 7 versus the 9-branched menorah. What's the difference between them and what's the relationship between them? First of all, Hanukkah, the word Hanukkah means dedication. So I think most of you know the story of Hanukkah. In the year 164 BCE, Judah, who was the son of Mattatyahu, led a band of rebels called the Maccabees. But Maccabee, by the way, means hammer. So I imagine these 5 sons of Judah as like a gang, and they called themselves the Hammer Gang. And they were fighting against the Syrian king Antiochus. Judah the Maccabee taught us that we can't sit idly by. If you have a belief that something is wrong, in this case that the Syrians were desecrating the temple and not allowing Jews to practice, and they were also doing things that would make the temple not holy. Supposedly they were barbecuing pork, and Judah and his gang of Maccabees fought against the Syrian army, and they won. And when they won, they looked for a flask of oil, like these flasks you see here from the 5th and 6th century CE, but very similar. And they found 1 flask of oil. And as you know, that flask of oil that should have lasted 1 day lasted for 8 days. And ever since, we have celebrated Chag Orim, the holiday, the festival of lights, beginning on the 25th of Kislev. Now, on a Chanukiah, pictured here on the right, we have 9 branches, 8 days for the light that the oil lasted, plus the shamash in the middle, which is always a little bit higher than the other 8 candles. And on the left, you see the 7-branched menorah. So they're very much related to each other, and one stems from the other. Now, Chanukiot are modern examples here of 8 candles plus the shamash, and I'm just showing you some of the work of my friends who made Chanukiot. There are not really very strict rules about what a Chanukiah has to look like. The rabbis have disagreed over the years about whether they have to be lined up in a row, all on the same level, or not. And it is pretty flexible, the rules about the Chanukiot. And in fact, because Hanukkah is not actually part of the Torah, and it's extraneous to the Old Testament, in fact, it is considered one of the minor holidays. And the reason that Hanukkah has become more popular in Western culture probably has more to do with our assimilation into non-Jewish communities than it does to the significance of the holiday itself. But it's really fun, and it's a good time of year to celebrate lights in general. So now, and then of course today, I love this Chanukiah. You can make a Chanukiah out of anything, and as we all know who've had children, you can take things from around your house. Your children can make Chanukiah, and they're all considered kosher. And this is just an example of a fun Chanukiah of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So in 70 CE, the Second Temple in Jerusalem were destroyed by the Romans. And this is where the story, gets interesting. So when the Roman army came to Jerusalem, they took all the spoils from the temple and they took them to Rome. In Rome, the Arch of Titus was built 10 years after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Emperor Domitian in memory of his brother Titus, who, along with their father Vespasian, had conquered Jerusalem. They built the arch right next to the Colosseum, which was built by the slaves, the Jewish slaves, and the money that they had stolen when they defeated Jerusalem. Inside the arch, and I'm sure many of you have been to Rome, there is this beautiful description of them stealing all the spoils from Jerusalem. And this is what it looks like today. They are carrying the menorah and the other pieces of things that went in the temple, and they're carrying it into Rome. Now take a look at the base of the menorah. The base of the menorah is different than the base that we saw that was described by Zechariah, and that would be later accepted as the official description of the menorah. This base is from the imagination of the Roman artists, and actually it was based on Greek designs. There are sea monsters and dragons. Those are images that would never have been in the temple. But this image of the menorah would come to be after the destruction of the temple, the one that Western civilization considers the most popular representation of a menorah. Now, we don't know where the actual menorah ended up. This is an up-close photograph, and you can see the base and the dolphins and the dragons on the bottom of it. It is not what the menorah looked like in the temple. Interestingly, in 2012, a professor at Yeshiva University, using very technologically advanced scanners, made a 3D replica of the Arch of Titus and colored it as it would have been colored at the time of its construction, in bright colors. We're not used to seeing it brightly colored, but they believe that this is how it would have looked. And you can see the show table, the showbread table, the signs that would have been carried by the Roman soldiers back to Rome, and the gold menorah, which, by the way, was about 5 feet tall, they believe. Now, as I said, we don't know where the actual menorah ended up. The 1st century history by Josephus relates that the treasures from the temple went into the Roman Temple of Peace that Vespasian built, but we don't know if the menorah was actually among the relics there. And since that Temple of Peace burned down in the year 192 CE, ever since then, nobody has actually seen a trace of the menorah. Now, I did put in the chat an interesting article in biblical archaeology by a professor who says he does know more about what happened to the menorah after the fire of the Temple of Peace. So if you want to take a look at that, please check out that link. So for 2,000 years, the Jews who had been slaves and who would stay in Rome would not walk beneath the Arch of Titus. That is until 1947. On November 29th, the United Nations declared that Palestine would become a Jewish country. And on that day, the chief rabbi of Rome, David Porat, led the Jewish community back through the arch. They went backwards through it as a symbol that Israel was moving forward, and that this represented a new freedom for the Jewish people. And ever since then, Jews are allowed to walk through the Arch of Titus, although I know that there are people who, when they visit, as a tradition, they like to spit. at the Arch of Titus. This is a Hanukkah that I found online this year, depicting the Arch of Titus. I think it would provoke discussion in your house, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. Even my husband and I disagreed about whether it was good or bad, but it is interesting that somebody would memorialize this on a Hanukkah, and everybody can have their own opinion about whether it's good or bad. Since the destruction of the Second Temple, the menorah has been the most important symbol of Jewish identity as a hope for redemption and return. I found it fascinating that the Jews of Rome, who, like all Jewish communities, adapted to their communities around them, used the menorah in the catacombs beneath the city of Rome when they buried their dead. Now, these are photos from the Villa Torlonia catacombs underneath Rome. And these were owned by Jewish families, and they would bury their dead in crevices within the catacombs, and they decorated the surroundings of the catacombs with the menorah. Here's a photo of the ceilings around in this one large catacomb at Villa Torlonia. Interestingly, Christians at the time would decorate the sarcophagi of their beloved relatives who would die with a portrait that they carved into the stone. Jews didn't do the portrait, they would replace that with a menorah. And this is an example of a Jewish sarcophagus in Rome. So throughout history, we have used the menorah as a way of remembering the destruction of the temple. Even as early as the 1st century, archaeologists are finding examples of the menorah in synagogues. This is the Magdala synagogue. Magdala is a town near the Sea of Galilee that historians believe Mary Magdalene was from. The town was destroyed in the same year that Jerusalem was destroyed. This, they believe, is an example of a Torah reading table from the Magdala synagogue. Fascinating, because also if you look at the base, it's a little hard to see from this photo, but the base of the menorah is the same as depicted in Zechariah's vision. The Duro-Europos synagogue is one of the oldest synagogues that we've seen evidence of. It was discovered in 1932, but it was dedicated in the year 244 CE. And the paintings on the walls were amazingly preserved. Here you see Aaron, the high priest, next to the menorah in the Second Temple. And then, of course, in Sippori, in the north of Israel, when they were digging to build a parking lot in 1993, they found beautiful, beautiful mosaics like this one, which depict the menorah, and you see all the floral imagery in it. Now, throughout time, from antiquity through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the menorah has been a very important image in illuminated manuscripts and in paper cutting. This is the oldest example we have of an illuminated manuscript. It was written in 929 CE. It's made of gold leaf on parchment, and it shows the vision of Zechariah with the 49 different flowers on it and the menorah. And it also shows the different tools that were used in the temple to take care of the lighting of the menorah, the oil flasks and the different tools used to put out the fire and the wicks, to cut the wicks. This is from Egypt in 929 CE. And another example of a very famous Bible, probably from Spain, 1528, shows you the tools that were used in the temple and the menorah from the temple. And then there's this really interesting, in the left corner, from the vision of the prophet Zechariah, he describes at the time that the Messiah will come, there will be a cleft in the Mount of Olives, and a tree will grow out of that cleft. And if you look in the left lower corner of this manuscript, you see that tree growing out of the cleft. So these traditions have been illuminated for many, many years and have not deviated very much. So back to a Shavuot. The Shavuot is, as I said before, an amulet that Jews in all different parts of the world would use, and artists would include always a menorah and the name of God. And here you see an example from the Carpathian Mountains near the Czech Republic. And the Shavuot is from Psalms 16:8, and the first word means I have placed. I didn't read, but I'm just conjecturing there that the word Shavuot sounds like Sheva, 7, although I believe they're different roots, but there is some connection there. But it is an amulet that people have used throughout history. Now, amulets were used in Jewish communities just like they were in Muslim communities to ward off illness. So this amulet in particular was made to ward off illness in times of plagues. And this one was made for a mother and child. And I thought it most appropriate at this time with our current situation. We could use all the amulets we can get. This is another example of an amulet of a Shavuot. You see the menorah in the center and the name Adonai at the top. And it's made out of silver from Persia. And it would have been worn as a necklace to ward off illness. And from India, the vision of Zechariah, that same menorah with the bowl at the top and the light radiating from it. And this was the top of a Torah ark, probably facing toward Jerusalem. And interesting to see an American version from 1861. A Mizrach and a Shavuot are very similar, and this is called a Mizrach, but it has the same purpose of knowing which direction to face toward Jerusalem, and it includes, of course, the menorah, and it's a paper cut by a man named Philip Cohen. My husband and I are very good friends with Tamar Fishman, and she is a big inspiration in my life because she's been doing paper cutting for the last 50 years. And 2 years ago, Tamar was commissioned by the US Postal Service and the Israel Postal Service at the same time to create the Hanukkah stamp. So this is a menorah or a Chanukiah. And you can see Tamar's vision is very close to Zechariah's because it's rooted in nature. And she's also put the symbols of Hanukkah around it. And if you go to the post office today to buy a Hanukkah stamp, this will be the stamp that you will get. Now, I just want to talk briefly about the idea of light in general as it relates to Jewish art. Light is significant in many, many ways, and it's been my inspiration for many projects. Let's start with the Torah itself. The Torah is often called Torah Ora, the teaching of light. So as an example, for this Torah cover, I made a burning bush with 7 flames coming out of it, and it represents the teaching of light. Here's a detail of it before it actually was wrapped around the Torah. Light is also described as how God is clothed, that God is wrapped in a robe of light. That's how God is described in Isaiah. So for this Torah, I wanted it to feel as if light was enrobing the Torah. Light is also considered a tree of life, and a tree of life is light. So even though this isn't specifically a menorah, it has the shape of a menorah as a way to unite and unify light, nature, and the tree of life. all of us, when we observe Jewish holidays, we begin the Jewish holiday at dusk and we end a Jewish holiday at dusk. So these three Torah covers represent dusk and the beginning of all our holy days. We also use candles, light, as a way to start and end our holy days. So Shabbat begins with the lighting of the candles and ends with Havdalah, lighting of a different candle. We memorialize people with a yahrzeit candle. So in Judaism, we use candles, we light candles on Hanukkah. For all our holy days, we are using candles and light. We also have midrashim that talk about the importance of light. There's a beautiful midrash that says at the beginning of time, God revealed only a very small amount of the light within God to us, and only through our mitzvot will the real light of God be revealed. So every day we work through those mitzvot to get to redemption and to the full light. This wall hanging, which is 24 feet wide, is about that midrash. And one of the most beautiful things about it is it was commissioned by a synagogue to honor the maintenance man who'd been with them for 48 years. And his name was Rosie. So you can see in the left, I've put a rose into this growing light that grows from this gareen, a seed on the right, through all the way to the left to the full light of redemption. And light is the source of divine goodness. The lightning, rainbows, the sun, the moon, the stars, these are all the light of God. And this is a wall hanging that depicts the menorah at the center of all that light of divine goodness. Now, there's one aspect of Judaism that I am very unfamiliar with, and that's Kabbalah. But Kabbalah is very connected to the idea of light, and in fact, the shape of the menorah. So you can see the way that the sfirot in Kabbalah are depicted is very similar to a menorah, and so many Hasidic artists will depict these and will show the interaction between the two shapes. The sfirot are the 10 attributes through which the divine, God, reveals himself, and Ein Sof, the infinite. So if you'd like to learn more about Kabbalah and the relationship with the menorah, please look that up. But you can see from this the similarity in the shape of the idea of the sfirot. Now, the connection between the menorah and the sanctuary has been extremely important ever since the destruction of the temple. We've replaced the temple with our synagogues. We've replaced the sacrifices with our prayers. And we use the Ner Tamid as a replacement for the menorah. These are examples of Ner Tamids by my friend Claude Rydell, who makes beautiful handmade glass art. He's in Minnesota. And I want to show these because I think his use of color and light is so evocative of all the light of goodness that I just relayed about the light in Torah. And so we have taken the menorah that was in the Second Temple, and we've replaced it in our own synagogues by this light that we never let be extinguished. This is an example where Claude has used the 7-branched menorah as an inspiration for his own very contemporary design. Now, menorah has been in every synagogue since the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. Even in Rome, you can see in the Great Synagogue of Rome, these menorahs that are high above their beautiful arch. And in many synagogues throughout the world, like this example from the temple in Atlanta, you can see their front doors have the very contemporary menorah on them. And in Europe, throughout the ages, you will find menorahs on on the ark curtains, on Torah covers, and in every synagogue. Most synagogue will have a menorah next to the ark, either on the right or left, or at the entrance. Oops. This is an example of a beautiful folk art painting by Leo Schutzman from 1960, and you can see, like most American synagogues, there will be menorahs on the bima. And in my own synagogue here in Connecticut, we have a very grand synagogue built in 1960, and this beautiful stained glass by Jean-Jacques Duval has as its main image a big menorah behind this very tall ark. And when a couple got married a few years ago in the synagogue, I used that menorah as an inspiration for their ketubah. So this is a watercolor and paper cut of the synagogue where they got married. Now, in the synagogue, we bring light in many ways. So this is one example. This is Huntington Jewish Center in New York. You can see their menorah on their bima, as many synagogues have on the left. They commissioned the ark curtain to reflect the quotation from Isaiah, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." And then above the ark, they commissioned these windows, which are a blessing that we say at the end of the Amida prayer. And it's part of it says, "Bless us, God, we are all as one in the light of your presence." And when you open their ark curtain, you see the Torah covers, which are all about light. There is the sun, the moon, and the stars, Torah Ora, the rainbow, wrapped in a robe of light, and other ideas that we talked about before about how light is expressed through Jewish imagery. Now, let me tell you just very quickly about a project I did that had to do with another symbol of the menorah. So here is one sketch I made for Temple Shalom in Medford. I was commissioned to make ark doors. They were replacing some very old 1950s metalwork with glass ark doors, and this is how I made their new ark doors. So I started with this suggestion of this menorah. But we discussed as a committee that the idea of the menorah should be light unto the nations, which is another theme of what a menorah is symbol of. So then I came up, with these other suggestions. And the committee decided that they wanted to go with this design. So this is the menorah that would become their ark doors. And the way I made it into ark doors is first I made a big fiber piece of art, and I started by drawing on muslin. I dyed all the fabric that would be cut and appliqued onto the fiber art, and this all starts as white silk that I import from China and I dye here in my studio in Connecticut. Then I appliqued it and sewed it into the design of the menorah. And then I quilted it on my long arm quilting machine. And this is what the wall hanging looks like. When the wall hanging was done, I photographed it and had the film put onto glass. That glass would go into this ark in Medford, and this is what it looks like as it's getting put together. The film is being put onto the glass. And this is what the ark looks like finished. It looks like a quilt, but it also looks like stained glass, and the Torahs can be seen a little bit through the ark. And now it's being used in different ways. So I'm making kits that people can color themselves. And then a British company is using it this year on a puzzle that's available through Wentworth Wooden Puzzles. So it just shows you that a menorah can go all around the world in different ways. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about what we spoke about at the beginning, the emblem of Israel. The visual elements of the design that was eventually chosen by the committee would harken back to the Arch of Titus. Interesting that they chose that the menorah would be from the Arch of Titus and not the one that was as envisioned by Zechariah, and that of course caused a lot of disagreement in Israel, but this is the one that was chosen. This was designed by the brothers Gabriel and Maxim Shamir, and it symbolizes the rebirth of the Jewish people. The two olive branches symbolize the future and the land of Israel, and then the word Israel was added at a very late time in the decision making. The olive branches represent peace. Of course, the minute it was published and declared the winner of the contest, the editor of the Haaretz newspaper, Shakin, called it a horror from the aesthetic standpoint, vulgar and amateurish. And Chief Rabbi Herzog said the menorah on the Arch of Titus should not have been copied. It should have been a more sacred description. But nevertheless, this is the emblem of the state of Israel. Now, the menorah that you see next to the Knesset was a gift from the British government on the 8th anniversary of Israel's formation as a modern state. It was designed by Beno Elkan, and on it are scenes of all different times throughout history that the Jews have had to fight against persecution through the time of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was moved from downtown Jerusalem to be near the Knesset. So if you go to Israel, when we can all travel again, make sure to stop by there and see this official menorah of the Knesset. Israel has a contest every year and for the Day of Independence, and they have poster contests all the time. And of course, Israel has a wonderful history of graphic art and graphic design. I love several of these designs. This one by El Al Airlines from 1959 is so beautiful and evokes the menorah so well. And then in 1987, this new comic was published, and the name is Orion, which is a play on words because Or meaning light, but it's also from the zodiac, Orion. And you can see his emblem on the center of his chest is the menorah. And then this is my favorite one. From 1930s, a company called Menorah Soap had this advertisement, and at the top it says, "Your sons will also live long." Why does it say that on this ad? Because in the story of the Maccabees, it's referring to Mattathias' sons, and it's implying that if you use Menorah soap, your sons will be strong and they will live long. So I thought only in Israel could you do a soap advertisement and hearken back to the Maccabees. Now, in addition to the strength of the menorah is also used as a symbol of hope. This is from 1987. A dress worn by an Ethiopian woman is hanging out to dry in Ethiopia. She's hoping to get on one of the airlifts to Israel, and eventually she would. But it shows her hope of Israel by the embroidered menorah on her dress. In 1913, there was a very famous exhibit in Israel by what would become the Bezalel Art School. And in 1914, you can see this Yiddish and English poster advertising the exposition was visiting the United States. And there you see Bezalel with the menorah, with his tools, working on the art that would go into the temple. Here's a detail from that in a very early 1900s style. And as I said, every year Israel has an Independence Day poster contest, and some of the designs are all evoke the menorah, many of them, as it did in this one from the 25th anniversary of the State of Israel. And this is my favorite. And I just want to conclude with this. I think the menorah was chosen for the state of Israel because it symbolizes nature. It symbolizes the human struggle for our autonomy. It symbolizes the power of God, light, and vision. And it shows that we Jews always have hope for wholeness, for return, and for redemption. The menorah, whether it has 7 or 9 branches, it's a sign of light during hard times and a promise of a better tomorrow. The menorah represents, for humans, the need to be active, like Judah the Maccabee, and hopeful that God will help us along the way during hard times. And our hope, like that of King Solomon, is for peace and quiet to Israel and to the world. So I want to wish everybody happy Hanukkah, Chag Orim Sameach, and I am going to switch to answer if there are any questions. There.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you
good.
so much, Jeanette. That was so interesting. There were a lot of comments about how beautiful the art was. There were a couple of questions that came through during the presentation, and if folks have more questions, we have time for a few questions. If you want to put those in the chat box now. The question that I remember coming up was, is there a difference, this maybe stylistically, between Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, different menorahs around the world or from different traditions?
From what I understand, first of all, a Chanukiah has, there are as many designs as there are people in the world, because there are very few prescriptions about what they have to look like. So you don't see a lot of differences based on where in the world they're from. I think it's more a time, you know, what was popular in Poland during the early 20th century is probably different than what was popular in Morocco. But I think it has more to do with time and with location. But no, I don't think you see distinct styles based on Sephardi or Ashkenazi. Not so much.
When did people start using candles as opposed to oil?
I am not going to be able to answer that question. I apologize. That is a history question that I am not equipped to answer. I'm sorry.
Some people still use oil. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very popular, especially in Israel. You see a lot of people using oil Chanukiot.
Yeah. Let's see. Lots of people thanking you. Yes, this was recorded. It will be available on YouTube in a day or two, and we will send out the link to that recording to everyone who registered, along with the informational links and a link to Jeanette's website, which we posted here, but in case you missed it. And I think that is all for the questions. So I wish you a happy Hanukkah. I wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. And thank you again for this incredible presentation.
Thank you. And some of those links that I sent, some of them are really interesting videos of the archaeologists going into the cistern, for instance, and finding the drawing of the menorah for the first time. And it's just amazing to think that something that's 2,000 years old has been sort of right there around Jerusalem this whole time. And it's incredible. And it's also incredible how little the style of the menorah has changed all these years. It's still the same shape. It still harkens back to nature. And you know, I just imagine life during the time of the temple, because we're all looking at the same kinds of imagery.